So good evening. Welcome to the Peace Action New York State's book event with Miriam Pemberton and her book, 6 Stops on the National Security Tour. I'm Sylvia Rodriguez-Case, and I'm co-chair of Peace Action Fund of New York State. This event is co-sponsored by Move the Money New York City. Molly Nolan will provide a short description and update on the campaign, the Move the Money campaign in New York City, at the closing portion towards the end of this event. Just a quick overview about Peace Action New York State and our mission. Peace Action New York State is the New York State chapter of Peace Action, the largest grassroots peace organization in the U.S., originally founded in November 15th of 1947, which is 65 years ago, just a few days ago. And it was founded by Norman Cousins, who was at the time the editor of the Saturday Review, and Clarence Pickett, who was Friends of America leader, one of American Friends Service Committee leader, and the poet Lenore Marshall. In 1957, SANE merged with FREES to form SANE Frege, and at that time, William Sloan Coffin Jr., who was part of FREES, was part of the merger, and we were all together. And then in 1993, the name of the organization was changed to Peace Action. And William Sloan Coffin was the leader, was the president of Peace Action. Peace Action New York State is a 501c4 membership organization working to shape the politics of foreign policy and who makes it. And we have 12 community chapters affiliates, and our work includes in-district lobbying. And in the past, we've been in Washington, D.C., and we hope to be there again post-COVID soon, lobbying with our representatives. We also endorse political candidates based on their positions and voting records on issues of peace and diplomacy. Dues-paying members of PANAS provide critical support for our on-the-ground activists. We also have Peace Action Fund of New York State is the 501c3 nonprofit organization, and it uses education to deepen understanding of U.S. foreign policy issues and how to help shape the policy towards peace. Our campus organizing program works with college campuses across New York State to provide educational and professional development opportunities for students who are deeply interested in peace and diplomacy. Your donations to PAFNAS are fully tax deductible and will support the next generation of peacemakers. This semester, we have 15 college chapters up and running, and we're optimistic about 3 more joining joining the group in the spring semester. There's a lot to say about Miriam Pemberton and her book and her accomplishments, but I'm leaving that up to Bill Hartung, who's going to introduce Miriam, and also he's going to moderate the questions and answer period that will follow Miriam's talk. We ask that you put your questions into the chat, which you go down to the bottom of the Zoom screen, and there's a chat that you can click on, and you can write in your questions so that we can field them and give them to Miriam. And Bill Hartung, I'll just give a quick introduction. He's the Senior Research Fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, focusing on the arms industry and the U.S. military budget. He's the author of Profits of War, Lockheed Martin and the Making of the Military Industrial Complex, and he is the co-editor with Miriam Pemberton on the book Lessons from Iraq, Avoiding the Next War. So I turn it over to you, Bill.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thanks everybody for joining us, and I'm thrilled to be able to talk about Miriam's book. We're longtime friends and colleagues, and she's been working on these issues longer than I'm going to reveal, but so have I. You may have seen the bio that was on the screen, but she's runs the Peace Economy Transition Project at the Institute for Policy Studies. She's also has served as a director for the National Commission on Economic Conversion and Disarmament. And there's the book we did together, which was mentioned. But most importantly, we're here to talk about her new book, 6 Stops on the National Security Tour, Rethinking Warfare Economies. And I will say about the book, having read and done a review of it, it can be a tough topic to get into, but it's beautifully done, because, whenever you write a book, they always say, tell stories, have characters, don't just give dry statistics like Bill Hartung would do. Miriam has accomplished that. So you get a sense of the communities involved, the people who have pushed to transition their companies and communities away from depending on Pentagon spending, some very promising efforts on things like work on hybrid buses and electric cars that unfortunately didn't really get up to scale, partly because of lack of federal support. If the government's spending $200 to $250 billion a year on researching and developing weapons, that's hard to compete with in the civilian sector. But if we had a shift of funds into things that we need, like addressing climate and pandemics and racial and economic inequality and so forth, we'd have a chance of making some of the kinds of transitions that Miriam talks about. But it's not just about money, and she talks about the processes and the things that we'd have to change both in ourselves and our communities to make all this happen. Before I give the floor to Miriam, as we're in a climate where the Pentagon budget is going very much in the wrong direction. Congress is adding tens of billions of dollars above what the Pentagon even asked for. Many of the members who are doing that are doing it because there are weapons being built in their states and districts, and that's the money that they're adding. So they're funneling money into their districts to win political support. So that's kind of the knot we have to untie. And there's groups in Congress like the ICBM Coalition, which is focused entirely on keeping the US building intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are probably the most dangerous weapons in the arsenal, because the president would have only a few minutes to decide whether to use them in a crisis. So they're kind of an accidental nuclear war waiting to happen. And yet a small number of senators from the states where these are based have been able to block any constructive action to reduce our reliance on those. There's an F-35 caucus pushing the most expensive weapon system in the history of the Pentagon, one that doesn't really actually work. There's a shipbuilding caucus, and on down the line. And so in order to break this political logjam, we need the kinds of analysis and recommendations that Miriam has in her book. And the last thing I'll say, which is a point of personal concern, is that I'm jealous, because not only is it such a good book, but all of my books have had weapons on the cover. And my goal is to eventually have one that does not. Now, granted, Miriam's has some missiles on the cover, but they're also windmills. So she's like halfway to my dream. And I'm very happy about that, for her at least. So anyway, I'll let Miriam take it away, and we'll have some time for discussion after she talks.
Thanks so much, Bill. And it's great to be with you all. I really appreciate this chance to talk with you about the book and to hear about your concerns and to figure out how this might be helpful. I thought I might start with sort of a word on how I got into this and sort of the origins of the book, and sort of how I did it and why I did it. I got a PhD in English literature, and by the time I was finished, which took me a long time, I kind of knew I didn't really want to be an English professor, but I was more interested in politics, but had no idea what to do about that, and figured this is my destiny. So, started the academic job search, but on the way, it takes a long time to do that. So I took a temporary editing job with this organization called the National Commission for Economic Conversion and Disarmament. And I didn't know what economic conversion was, but it sounded, vaguely progressive. And so, for a temporary job, why not? And as it happened, I took the job a month before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And so suddenly this issue of economic conversion, swords into plowshares, was this huge issue. And it seemed like it was going to be the linchpin of everything I cared about. We were going to bring down the defense budget and fund education and healthcare and the environment. And so I just got completely hooked by it, and there went my academic career. During that time, there were just a lot of people, probably some among those I'm speaking to, who were really working hard on this and creatively. The government devoted, a substantial amount of money to it. And I outline all this in the book. Also, I think it's a little known fact that the head of Lockheed Martin in the early 90s said publicly that he thought that the growth for the company was going to come from the civilian sector. And he thought, the company would wind up being about 55% defense and 45% non-defense. So, did that happen, folks? As we all know, the excitement over economic conversion didn't really last. We had Colin Powell saying, on the one hand, we're running out of enemies, and on the other hand, we need to develop multiple layers of military dominance to prevent a peer competitor from, challenging our status as the sole superpower. As we know, the contractors were, doing everything they could to make sure that this, the substantial cuts in the defense budget that happened in the post-Cold War period didn't last. And they got their gravy train back up and running. And one of the ways they did this was to take a tactic that they were already doing, but they really put it on steroids to spread their contracts as widely and deeply in the American landscape as they could. Clearly, this was not a recipe for industrial efficiency, but it certainly was a recipe for developing what I call a political protection racket for themselves and what they were making. So, as Bill mentioned, I got into some other things, doing some reports incorporating non-military tools into our security budgeting. And I did a series of reports comparing what the US spent on military security as opposed to climate security. But I was always looking for ways to kind of pursue this passion of mine for swords into plowshares. So in 2014, I learned about this base in a sort of destitute corner of Arkansas, where the US manufactured and stored much of its chemical weapons stockpile starting in World War II and continuing on from there. And they, in addition to this base with this production facility, there was this giant lab that they built next door to work on new chemical weapons designs. And then came the Chemical Weapons Convention, so suddenly this economic mainstay for this community in a very poor quadrant of Arkansas, was kind of out of business. Their reason for being had gone away. And so, it struck me that here was a story where I could connect the local level of this and write about this community while connecting it to, this broader campaign for global disarmament of weapons of mass destruction. So I went down there, met all sorts of interesting people, had visited the lab that actually Richard Nixon had turned into no longer making chemical weapons designs, but it has become the only FDA, Food and Drug Administration lab outside of Washington, D.C. And I write in the book about visiting this lab, and you're driving through these pine forests and these kind of trailer parks, and And then you come around this corner and you come to this clearing. And then, you know, I said, I felt like I had arrived in Oz, you know, it was this enormous facility that was doing some interesting things. And I also learned that this community had, at least some members of it were trying to take the research coming out of this lab and turning it into a kind of a hub for job creation around biotech. I also found that every time I mentioned the base to somebody, you know, in the community, they would almost invariably say, "You're not going to say anything bad about the base, right? Because this, you know, is this sort of mainstay of their economy that is a much diminished thing, but that they hang on to because they're still struggling to find something else." So I had such a good time writing about all this that after I went off the payroll, I moved over to the Institute for Policy Studies. And after I went off that payroll, I decided, you know, why not do what you really enjoy doing? So I decided I could do more of these stories, go to more places, and, you know, find out how these places had become dependent on the Pentagon, and, you know, who works there, and then use those places to kind of paint a portrait of the larger military industrial complex. So there's an overview chapter that tries to do that. And I also, you know, chose these communities because in each case, it's sort of, there was something there that helped me build the case, which is my kind of larger argument that if we can shift to you know, on the federal level, to a climate-centered industrial policy, that for communities like this, you know, there were opportunities to build an economic transition beyond the war machine. And so I went to military Meccas like Connecticut, where there's kind of a triangle of military production. You've got the nuclear submarines over here, and then you've got the jet engines up at the top of the state, military jet engines, and then you got helicopter manufacturing down near New York City. And then I went to Southern California to look at the aerospace industry there, and of course Los Alamos, you know, where nuclear weapons were born and where they still are maintained and researched and, you know, increasingly also produced. So I also went to kind of out of the way places like Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which had no military economy to speak of, but sort of created a military economy out of pork barrel politics. And in your fair state in Binghamton, I found a perfectly good case showing that converting military swords into plowshares is perfectly possible. And you know, what were the obstacles to doing it and how they overcame them, and what would be needed to, you know, make this into a bigger piece of the Binghamton economy. So as Bill said, here we are with military spending soaring and military contractor profits soaring right along with it. But as I said in the conclusion to the book, in the long term, there is no path to a less militarized world that doesn't run through the task of tackling the economic underpinnings of militarism. And so I hope that this book will be a resource for that struggle. Looks like, do I have a little time? I want to make a pitch at some point for how local community organizing for conversion could make sense in the current moment, but I can wait on that, or I can, you know, plow ahead, whatever you'd like.
I think you have time.
Okay.
I think Sally agrees with me, but she can weigh in if not.
Is that okay? Okay, so I think, I've done a bunch of these webinars with various groups, and the best question is always the hardest question, which is, you're painting this terrible portrait. What can we do about it? There was a column last week by E.J. Dion, who's a Washington Post columnist, and he was talking about the election, and he was talking about Gretchen Whitmer's victory speech, in which she was highlighting all the green manufacturing that they were bringing to the state of Michigan. And then he said, watch this theme. How to build a new economy is the big issue of the next decade. So I think that our task is to make the defects of a military-led economy a bigger part of the way this issue is framed. And again, I hope the book can be a tool for this task. So in my mind, there's only one piece of legislation, positive, substantial legislation that is passed this year that we can use. And that is the Inflation Reduction Act, which will pump $37 billion a year for 10 years into developing green manufacturing. So my little pitch to you all is that parts of the peace movement that are interested in economic transition work over the next 10 years could, focus on one or more military dependent locations, team up with the environmentalists in those regions, meet with the local elected officials and say, so there's going to be $370 billion out there for the picking. What are you interested in building? And how could we get a piece of this money to build an alternative economy for our region? And then, depending on what you hear, convening a broader set of community stakeholders to help shape these initiatives. So this, the work that we all do, exposing and confronting the military industrial complex, that is, important work, obviously, and we've all done it. This sort of strategy would be not so much, or it would be parallel to that work. It would be more like ignoring the military industrial complex, and building a better alternative around it, sort of making the military economy seem like a tired, highly compromised way of economic development compared to the dynamism of building a green economy, and the necessity of doing that. So I feel like we have an opening in the form of all that money that's headed to the green economy that we didn't have before. And I'd be happy to consult with anybody about this and help it along if anyone's interested. Anyway, I think it's time to hear from you all.
Thanks, Miriam. There's a couple questions already, both kind of location focused. One is to talk a little more about Binghamton example, and the other is Sally Jones wants you to do more work. So if you did a second book, tour 2, what communities would you want to focus on?
Binghamton, yes. I believe Jack will be talking a bit about what goes on is going on in Binghamton. But what I wrote about was there is this, back in the post-Cold War period, again, Lockheed Martin was looking around for things to do because the military was not spending what it had been on weapons. And so they sort of told their engineers, you know, poke around, see what you can come up with that we might be able to manufacture in the civilian sector. And so some engineers at Lockheed in Binghamton figured out how to take the hydraulic system from one of the fighter jets that they were working on and adapt it to become the drivetrain for a hybrid electric bus. And this was an entirely successful project. It took a long time, and on the way, Lockheed transferred ownership right when these buses were beginning to hit the streets in New York and Tokyo and elsewhere. Lockheed decided to just get rid of it and sell it all to BAE Systems, which it is now. But they, have carried on with this bus project and figured out how to solve. There are many pitfalls that have made military contractors moving into civilian production. Many pitfalls that have made those efforts fail. But in this case, they didn't, because they learned from those cases to avoid, I would say the writ large, the main thing that caused those efforts, or many of the efforts, to fail was that military producers simply tried to use the production techniques and finance and everything else, use the practices that they knew best from military production and just start using those to produce for the commercial sector. And of course, the sectors are very different, and you just can't do that. So these engineers at what wound up as BAE in Binghamton found ways to really adapt what they were doing to the commercial marketplace. And so it's a very successful project, but because the lion's share of, as we all know, our federal spending goes to R&D and procurement for military production. This remains a very small small part of what they're doing at BAE in Binghamton. But I argue if we began funding, green manufacturing, green transport, green energy, if we made a substantial shift of our industrial policy to support those, those endeavors, the contractors would follow the money the way they always do. However, there are many reasons to be skeptical of saying of course, nobody would want to argue that we should, give green manufacturing over to the military contractors. That would be a disaster for many reasons. But there are cases showing that if they really focus on, changing their ways to really be, consistent with what the standards of commercial manufacturing, that they have enough funding, then they can do it. Oh, was there another question about, what is my next thing?
Your dream locations, if you could go to more places, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't figured that out. I'm sorry. I would love to hear your thoughts, and if anybody takes me up on this offer to, try to work on bringing some IRA money to defense dependent locations. Sorry, I'd probably go there and write about that. but I don't know where those are right now.
All right, well, people should pour questions into the chat, and I had one in the meantime, which is, you went to Los Alamos, and it's a quite sophisticated lab. I think a lot of the scientists and engineers there would be perfectly happy to be doing something more constructive. But they say it's the most challenging science. It's where the money is. The federal government spends about half of its R&D money on military activities of various sorts. So what did you find there, both in terms of, the interest and anything that seeds that might have been planted already to do other kinds of work?
Well, this it was really hard to get military people to talk to me. I once in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, I had this an appointment to meet with the vice president at the local Lockheed Martin facility there, and I showed up at 9 a.m. and the receptionist said, "Oh, I'm sorry, he's not going to be able to meet with you." And I said, "Well, what do you mean? I had this appointment." And they said, "Oh, well, he's in a meeting." And so I said, "Well, okay, I'll just wait." And then they said, "Well, actually, he's going to have to leave the building." And then I said, "What do you mean we have this appointment?" And finally, this innocent person came through and said, "Oh, no, he's right over there in the conference room." And so I'm going, "Well, how about it?" And finally, this very large person, male, came out and told me I had to leave. And so clearly, between the time I made the appointment and showed up for the appointment, they'd Googled me and they decided no way did they want to talk to me. But I did have success when I found, people who had retired from the military, or in the case of Los Alamos, a scientist who decided he really wanted to do something else. So that was, he was terrifically helpful. And he said, yes, you can do research, it's on things that don't have to do with nuclear weapons. You have to frame it as with some sort of national security frame. And so there are very tiny projects having to do with solar energy, wind power, geothermal, various projects. But he said, you basically have to raise the money to do it yourself. Whereas if you stick with nuclear weapons, you can, do anything you want. And he also said that the research on nuclear weapons may not be, very, as high quality as we think it would be for all the money that they spend on it, because once you do classified research, then you don't have to get your research peer reviewed by other scientists, and you can get away with a lot of things that aren't very sound. But so there is a part of Los Alamos where they're trying to create the impression that we have all this research and it can have all sorts of applications to the civilian sector. But, the amount of money that they spend on this is really minuscule. So if they, again, if they were interested in really funding, taking this research and really making important civilian advances with it, they'd have to spend a whole lot more money. I will say that I learned in during the post-Cold War period that there was really concern, on the part of the labs that, there really wasn't a need for nuclear weapons anymore. So, what's going to happen to us? And the Secretary of Energy actually, created a commission to sort of say, what should these labs do? Should they really refocus themselves on, renewable energy? What is their mission going to be now that we can get rid of our nuclear weapons? We know what happened to that. And this commission, unfortunately, she put, this corporate guy in charge. And so his main recommendation of the commission was that, the lab should be privatized so that corporations could run it, So there was this opportunity to do, to give the labs a whole different agenda, and it was not successful.
All right. There were two questions related to the military industry workforce. One was, how big a part of it is it of our national employment? The other was a little different, which was, do we think there's a crisis of conscience among any of the people building these weapons that might be put to use in support of the kind of transformations we like to see?
So I haven't seen much in the way of a crisis of confidence. However, there's I write about it, this fabulous labor leader, the head of the machinists union in Connecticut, and he said, for his workers who were working on the engine for the F-35 fighter jet and other jets, he said, if tomorrow, we announced that you're no longer going to be making fighter jet engines, you're going to be making wind turbines. He said he thought his members would be fine with that. There's a problem with, the military pays rather well, and so people are very happy about that. I participated in a study that was done in the sort of between the UK and the US that surveyed a lot of defense workers in the US and the UK, and that their finding was pretty much, we don't want to have to leave where we're working and try to find another job. We want to make the money that we're already making, but there were some that expressed a lot of interest in in working in the clean energy field, and so I just think given a really different industrial policy that really takes seriously the climate crisis that we're in and funds a transition, most of the workers would be perfectly fine with that.
And this is always a hard thing to guesstimate, but there was a question about how much of the workforce in the US is involved in military production.
You may know a figure better than I do. It's not a big number. It's not a huge portion of the economy, but military industry certainly tries to make it seem like an absolutely critical part of, the jobs base of the United States. And, again, just talking about the spreading of contracts all America, Lockheed Martin says, brags on its website now that the F-35 is made in 45, I think it is, states now, which is crazy, but they're clearly trying to make everyone think that this is a critical part of, of the economy of so many communities around the country, and that, so therefore it can't be changed. But it's often exaggerated how many defense workers there are. So I forget whether it was you or me that came. I think it was you, Bill, that noted that in the state of Wyoming, there's like one F-35 production facility that has like 10 workers in it. So there's a lot of exaggeration going on there.
Yeah, well, the only recent estimate I've seen, Taylor Barnes, who's a very good journalist who writes on these subjects, dug up some statistics from the National Defense Industrial Association, which is the trade group for the weapons industry. And they do these annual snapshots of the industry. So 20 years or so ago, they said, oh, there's 3 million direct jobs in weapons manufacturing. And recently they've been saying there's 1 million. Now there's other jobs in subcontractors and multiplier effect and so forth from people spending their wages. But the direct jobs, by their own admission, have come down dramatically. And I think it's partly automation, it's partly shipping jobs overseas. There's an F-35 factory in Italy and Japan and so forth. And also in terms of the quality of the work, there's been movement towards putting weapons production in right-to-work states. Like they removed the F-16 production line to South Carolina, for example. So it's really, as Miriam was saying, it's the way that they strategically place the jobs that I think gives them the power, more so than that it's a big percentage of the national workforce. So, there's a question here. In Staten Island, there was a Navy home port in the 90s. I remember this. Open for a year and closed after the end of the Cold War. The community was left to decide what to do with the infrastructure, try to convert it. Seems similar to what other communities have experienced. So we have communities, how do we warn local communities not to go down this route? And also maybe some examples of, places where they've had bases that they've managed to turn it around into, some productive activities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one I often mention is the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. And it took them a really long time and it took a lot of money, but eventually they created this very vibrant kind of zone of economic development around. There's some light manufacturing, there's some housing, there's retail, and and in fact there are more people working there now than were ever working there when the base was open. So that's a very nice case. Also, another is the Brunswick Naval Air Station off of the coast of, on the coast of Maine. And there again, they have taken that base and turned it into, I think they have a branch of the university there, and again, retail and housing and some green economic development as well. I think I just saw somebody adding in the Brooklyn Naval Shipyard. So there are many examples. The complexity is that it's it almost always depends on, where you are. So if you're in an urban environment like Philadelphia or Brooklyn, it's a lot easier to, to create an economic alternative than it is for these bases that are out in the middle of nowhere, where there just isn't anything else to go on. And so, back to the example of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, what they're trying to do is take this research, the FDA research, and develop businesses to sort of supply that research and to create jobs that way. But it's a much more uphill battle, there. Some of these, ICBM bases in North Dakota and so on. It's much harder to do, but it certainly, it certainly has been done.
So we're getting close to 10 to the hour. Should we do one more question, or should we move to the next piece? Hearing nothing, I'm going to ask you one more
no,
question. Oh, no,
no.
Sylvia, yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to go to a couple of things, but we could, if people want to stay on to address the questions further, people can stay on if you want, but that's up to people.
Well,
we
why
do
don't
need
you
to
do,
get to we need to get to the move the money, and we also want comments from Jack Gilroy in Binghamton.
yeah, why don't we do the other parts, and then we'll see later if people want to stay, of course.
Yeah, okay.
Miriam,
There were some good
permitting.
questions, yeah.
Sure, so we'll move to the next part.
All right. So thank you, Miriam and Bill, and maybe we'll be coming back with some more questions. But I want to introduce Molly Nolan. She's a very involved MTM New York City activist, and she will fill you in quickly on the Move the Money campaign in New York City. We want you to hear about. They're a co-sponsor of this event, and they're doing a lot of hard work right now. Molly.
Let me unmute myself. Move the Money is a coalition of 60 faith-based peace, labor, community groups who was formed in December of 2018 with the goal of getting the New York City Council to hold hearings on the detrimental impact on New York residents of the Pentagon's massive budget. It was $700 billion then. It's up to $843 billion for the coming year. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. In 2019, we got Council Member Udanis Rodriguez to introduce Resolution 747A, which called on the Council to hold hearings and to go on record calling for money to be moved from the Pentagon to the needs of our community: housing, schools, health, social services, public transportation, among others. Although a majority of council members co-sponsored 747A, Speaker Corey Johnson would not move it forward, and it died at the end of the last council session. We're working to once again introduce a resolution calling for hearings and getting the city council to go on record in favor of moving the money. I've tried to put a link to our updated resolution in the chat. I'm not sure it worked. I'll put my email in if you want that, and a link to our petition. At the moment, we don't have a resolution number and don't have co-sponsors. I will spare you the unhappy details of how inefficient, untransparent, and frustrating the current city council seems to be. But our campaign hasn't stopped. We are circulating a petition to the city council asking it to call on the federal government and legislatures to move significant funds away from the military budget to human needs and services in New York City and elsewhere. The petition calls on the council to hold hearings about the negative impact of outrageously large military spending. This is vitally important, not only because the military budget has gone up, but because Mayor Adams is planning across the board cuts on city departments that will exacerbate current problems and bring new crises. The petition is a way of both putting pressure on city council members to try to get this resolution on the floor and moving forward. But equally importantly, it's a way to educate people about the work priorities of how our tax dollars are being spent. You can help by signing and circulating our petition. I've tried to put it in the chat. If it didn't work, you can email me and I'll put my email in the chat. We hope not only that you'll sign as an individual, but that you will circulate the petition to members of the various groups with whom you work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly. So we'll make sure you get that information after this meeting somehow, petition link and all that.
Tara seems to be
thank you.
putting some of it in.
Yes, we've done something there. Now we're going to move to Jack Gilroy from our Broome County Peace Action, and he's going to tell us more information about Binghamton and this and how that community has reacted to what's going on there. You're muted, Jack.
Thank you for saying a few good words about Binghamton. We're not that well known, you know, tucked up in upstate New York. But back in 1991, Coleman McCarthy from the Washington Post came to the school where I was a teacher of participation in government because he heard about our students who were saying something about economic conversion. The kids and all of us invited in Martin Marietta, which at the time was, now it's Lockheed Martin, of course, General Electric, which at that time was very big in our community, impacting the area in war production for many years. A smaller company, Link Aviation, that trained aviators going back to World War II. All of these companies, IBM included, IBM was the superpower in our area at the time. They were invited by the students to come for a town meeting where the topic would be economic conversion. And only one responded, and that was the smaller company, Link. And the president at the time, his name was Gallagher, was very good. He was good with the students, et cetera, very hopeful because the big move then was that we were going to move forward. We're going to start producing things that really mattered, not objects that destroyed and killed, but rather individual products that would improve the world. Of course, we know that didn't happen. Coleman McCarthy wrote about it in the Washington Post about the students, et cetera. As a side note, of course, Coleman was eventually shifted to the style pages, which because he was too much into talking about economic conversion in war and in supporting nonviolence. So he eventually left the Washington Post. But we stayed on. But over the years, I feel that I didn't do enough in the rest of us. We've combined peace action with Veterans for Peace. And of course, there's so many topics of war and justice, et cetera, that we kind of shied away from really looking at some of the real bad boys and girls, and that is the military-industrial complex, the economic situation of big corporations. So we came together last September for an activity that I wished that would be emulated around the country, and that was that we decided that Peace Action in Veterans for Peace would approach BAE, which was not here when my kids were objecting and had their town meetings. BAE, a British company that started off as British Aeronautical Engineering. Now it doesn't mean much anything other than BAE, which they claim in some reports they're the third largest in Bill and Miriam would know that, the third largest producer of military weapons. Sometimes they're ranked as number 9, but whatever, they're in downtown Endicott, which is probably about 8 miles west of Binghamton. So we went there, we had about 40 people, banners. I don't know if you can see the banner behind me, but that was one of the banners that we had. We had a microphone, audible, we have audio microphones to speak to the people inside, hopefully, that heard us. We had a letter that would go to the CEO of BAE, which we also sent certified mail to BAE. And of course, we have a video on this if anybody's interested in finding it. There was a small group called Black Rhino that would not let us go in the door to try to deliver the message. They said that they were an independent group, not working for BAE, but contracted by BAE. So we did our thing there with music and song, etc. And then we drove about more like 10 or 12 miles further west to the little town of Owego, New York. And that's Lockheed Martin. I say Lockheed Martin, there are 139 Lockheed Martin establishments, but the last I checked, and 400 worldwide, 139 in the United States. But anyway, we went there, and it was the Tioga County police there that prevented us from delivering the message in. But the point was that we did get media coverage. We've been very successful in our activities by getting media coverage. And it's so much better than just holding signs on corners, or I think even better maybe than sending something out in a tweet, to have thousands of people see this particular action. So it was the first time in many years that first time ever really that groups really came in since late 1990s. There were a group of people from Ithaca, New York, that had a United Nations investigation. They claimed that they were inspectors, United Nations inspectors, looking for weapons of mass destruction, right? That was 1998. And so this was relatively, and I don't think that much there are specific actions around the country. But if Miriam and Bill, with all of the knowledge that they have, can inspire people to use that information to take action, perhaps maybe next year, prior to the November 2023 Merchants of Death Tribunal that is being run by Kathy Kelly. Kathy, you know, the 3-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee, the leader of Banned Killer Drones, Nick Mattern, and Brad Wolf, a 40-something young lawyer from Lancaster, who is doing the heavy lifting, interviewing people from Cornell West, and eventually they hope even the Pope, right, on the crimes of the American merchants of death, right, the world merchants of death. We will be focusing on the American. So that will be next November 10th, and it will be worldwide. It will be the 10th to the 13th. And I think that if we can do some actions before then around the country to perk up people a bit more, to awaken them to what is going on, I think this would be really great. So thanks very much, Miriam, for the work, and Bill for the work that you're doing. But hopefully this can be brought to action. That's what we have to do.
Jack, hopefully you could share with us the information about November and what you're doing. So
right, it's very much, all you have to do is go to merchantsofdeath.org, merchantsofdeath.org. Also go to one word, bannedkillerdrones.org, bannedkillerdrones.org, and you'll find all the information that there were indictments delivered to General Atomics, the maker of the Reaper drone, which is now in Poland, a NATO country, right? There are indictments that were given to Boeing, right? F-35, et cetera. There were indictments that were given to General Atomics, did I say that? To Raytheon, right? All of these companies received indictments by a team that included Ann Wright, who flew in from Hawaii to be in Washington, D.C., to issue the indictments. There are about 10 people who did that. So this is a pretty exciting time for many of us, and it's a whole year of preparation, a lot of interviews. The Cornell West interview was 2 hours alone, so you can see the editing that's going to have to be done. But these people are going on trial. We're going to put them on trial and expose them to the world. And I hope that Peace Action and the information, I'm sure that Bill and Miriam will be 2 people that Brad will very much want to interview. So good luck, and good things that are going to happen, I believe, in the next year.
thank you very much, Jack. We're gonna, we go back to Bill and Miriam and see if you want to continue with some more questions that were posed. And if people want to stay on, that'll be wonderful. I think we can do this, stay a little longer, maybe 15 minutes. And those that can't stay, thank you for joining us. Bill, do you want to try to field some of those questions with Miriam?
Yeah, Miriam, how's your time? I don't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could do another maybe 10 minutes.
10
Okay,
minutes, okay.
that's good. It's like overtime in football, unless you're a Buffalo fan. So there was a question about labor unions, which you talk about in the book, but could there be more of a push to get out of this kind of work, which can be dirty and dangerous and so forth? And I know there's a history of unions being more active than they are now on this, but a little bit about the role of unions, maybe.
Yeah. So, unions have been, many of them, particularly the AFL, stalwart supporters of the Cold War, in part because, military spending is, as we all know, the biggest part of the budget that Congress votes on every year. And so, this is looked at as, in addition to, people's sense of patriotism with the Cold War, it's the sense that, this is where the federal government is putting its money. So this is where I'm going to go to get my job. But there are, many exceptions to that. And, the machinist union was headed by this guy, William Wimpesinger, who was this strong proponent of economic conversion. And in 1992, during the post-Cold War period, the AFL-CIO came out with a very strong statement supporting economic conversion and laying out plans. And of course, all of this harkens back to Walter Reuther of the UAW, who was worried after World War II that soldiers were going to come home and have no jobs, and the workers that had been part of military industry to win World War II were also going to be out of jobs. And so he came up with a very strong and detailed proposal for how the military industry could be really the expertise and the equipment could be transferred into building up the railroads in the United States, and building up the housing stock for returning GIs. And so unions have been supporters, and they've also done very creative work on finding alternatives. I will say one story about going to Palmdale, California, which is north of LA, where Lockheed has its skunk works, its kind of secret projects that, so it's now working on hypersonic weapons technology at this base north of LA. So I had an appointment with the head of the union representing those workers. And, as with my experience with this vice president of Lockheed in Pennsylvania, the head of the union was very happy to talk to me. But then I got a call. I was already in the car going to the site to meet with him, and he said, nope, we're not going to talk to you. And so, again, he clearly Googled me and found that he didn't have any interest in meeting with me, because the jobs of his workers are dependent on military spending. However, on that base, there is this facility that was part of military contracting, but is now it's the home of this Japanese company that is building all the streetcars that are running on the streets of LA. But again, it has trouble cobbling together the money to do what to build those streetcars and to sort of build out its operations, while the rest of the military contractors on this site are doing very well. So again, it's to me an argument for a real shift in our industrial policy to focus on the climate crisis and become the catalyst for a real green economic transition. And
Well,
those
all I say
workers,
is damn Google. Google seems to be getting in your way everywhere you try to get an interview.
right. Right.
Well, there's one more question, and then maybe we should close. But there was a question partly for Peace Action, and Miriam can weigh in as well, but about getting universities in New York State to take up the call for a shift from military technology to green technology. I don't know if that's come up on any of the campuses, or if anybody knows of that kind of activity that's gone on already.
I could
Oh,
say
yeah, go ahead.
something there. So yes, the SUNY Binghamton has become, there's this one guy, this chemist who won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for his work on lithium batteries for electric cars. And he has spearheaded this effort to make, and right on the campus, right next to BAE, to make Binghamton into this hub for clean battery manufacturing. And they've gotten a bunch of money from the infrastructure bill and several other pots of money, and they are really I think they're going to do it. They are going to sort of convert Binghamton to this clean energy manufacturing hub. So and it's all the research is all coming out of SUNY Binghamton. So and it's really important that university is there working with manufacturers to commercialize the technology that's come out of the university.
Well, that's great. Well, I think in terms of Q&A, I think we've done our bit, but I don't know if Peace Action folks want to say any final words.
Yeah, first of all, thank you all. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for everyone for attending. I think it was a very interesting book event, and we're going to put up a little 3 different things. How you can join Peace Action. Do we have that PowerPoint to put up? The closing PowerPoint?
Yeah, we'll put that right up.
And we're also going to send these 3 little slides out on an email to thank everybody for coming to the event. But it basically, what we're going to have is how to join Peace Action New York State. And here's the specific steps, but we'll send this to you also in an email. And the next one is how you can find out about upcoming events, going to panis.org. And you can also sign up for Peace News, so you see a weekly email that tells you what's going on, and you can sign up for action alerts. And here's again, the information about how to get Miriam's book through the publisher Routledge, and you use the promotion code SS225 with a 25% discount. So we'll send you this in an email also, but we'll put it up again. Yeah, thank you. But thank you for staying overtime, and Miriam and Bill and all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank
And I
you.
think some of the questions can be responded to that were left in the chat if there's specific ones that need to be answered. But thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Right.
lot.
Take care.
Bye-bye.